D.C., Michael Cohen, who of course was sentenced earlier this week, decided to end the week by going on Good Morning America. Here's a clip.
He's saying very clearly that he never directed you to do anything wrong. Is that true?
I don't think there's anybody that believes that. First of all, nothing at the Trump Organization was ever done unless it was run through Mr. Trump. He directed me, as I said in my allocution, and I said as well in the plea. He directed me to make the payments. He directed me to become involved in these matters, including the one with McDougal, which was really between him and David Pecker, and then David Pecker's counsel. I just reviewed the documents in order to protect him. I gave loyalty to someone who truthfully does not deserve loyalty.
He was trying to hide what you were doing, correct?
Correct.
And he knew it was wrong?
Of course.
And he was doing that to help his election?
You have to remember at what point in time that this matter came about, 2 weeks or so before the election, post the Billy Bush comments. So yes, he was very concerned about how this would affect the election.
And for everybody watching, that's what's so key. This is happening post Access Hollywood tape. Donald Trump knew at that point that the possibility of his victory was fading. If something else came out at the very end, he knew that his chances, any outside chances, of getting elected were finished. That's why Sam Stein, the cover-up, the hush money, and now you have David Pecker with AMI saying, yes, we did it to help him win the election. We did it to help his campaign. That's just devastating, and it would be devastating for any Republican or any Democrat who had a conspiracy to hide that significant of a payment from the Federal Election Commission and more importantly, the American voters.
Yeah, I mean, lost in a lot of this is note that these affairs didn't happen in 2016. These affairs, alleged affairs, sorry, happened many, many years ago. The reason they were surfacing in 2016 was precisely because of the electoral context in which they were being considered. It was the Billy Bush tape. It was the impending vote. So the idea that this was not campaign-related just doesn't pass the smell test. It was clearly a campaign-related payment by Trump. But I am also struck by how far we've gone down the rabbit hole here, and I don't think this helps Trump at all. If you recall, his first instinct was to deny that any payment whatsoever took place. Actually, before that, he denied that any affair took place. Then he denied that any payment took place. Then he told people to ask Michael Cohen about it. They disseminated. Now his stance is a payment may have taken place, but it was done without, my understanding of the legal context of it. And then we have him talking about how no one's ever prosecuted for campaign finance laws. Well, Trump pardoned someone for a campaign finance law violation, Dinesh D'Souza. He knows that campaign finance laws are in fact enforced by the federal government. He's pardoned someone for this, but one of the problems he clearly has is that he's told so many different lies about this whole situation that it's incredibly impossible to believe him right now. And just one last thing, Joe, to your point about the legal team he's surrounding himself with, who seem really incapable to handle the task at hand. We were talking with Rudy Giuliani about the Cohen result, the plea, and he was talking about the crime. His quote to us about why this was insignificant was the following, quote, "Nobody got killed, nobody got robbed," end quote. I find that remarkable, to dismiss any crime because no one got killed or robbed. There are crimes that involve something other than murder or robbery.
Yeah, there are. And of course, the lawmakers, the Republican lawmakers who pass these laws, cannot now suggest, as Orrin Hatch has suggested, that you can just brush laws aside, that, quote, anybody can be arrested for anything these days. It's just an embarrassment, and I hope that my former Republican Party moves past that. Heidi Przybyla, I had a great torts law professor at the University of Florida Law School that would always say to me and say to the rest of the class, he said, just have a basic straight face test. Before you try something out in front of a jury, try it in front of a mirror first before you go to court. And if you can't keep a straight face while you're making that argument, go to plan B. Well, Donald Trump's arguments regarding this payoff and suggesting that it's not a conspiracy and suggesting that everybody does it and suggesting that it wasn't related to the campaign, that's just not going to pass anybody's straight face test. It's not going to pass any judges or prosecutors or juries' straight face test. I wonder if the Republicans will think it suffices.
And I think, Joe, you know, the timing discussion that you've been having here about this being clearly related to the election. Well, last night we learned something even more damning about why this would be seen both through a legal and political lens as a potential conspiracy. And that is that it went all the way back to August of 2015 when you had Trump in the room talking to Pecker and Cohen about, hey, I could have a woman problem. And if any of them pop their heads up, this is what we're going to do. And that is essentially what we learned yesterday, which completely flies in the face of what Giuliani had told us at the time when the Access Hollywood tape came out, which was that it was, you know, the payments were made simply to protect his marriage and his wife. No, here we have evidence that this was concocted at the very outset of the campaign as a conspiracy to try and cover up any problem from any woman who would raise her voice during the campaign. In terms of the Hill, we still have the usual players like Orrin Hatch, Grassley saying Cohen is a liar, you can't trust him. And that's in spite of the fact that, like we've said on this show, you have documentary evidence. Even if you think Cohen is a liar, you have that tape, you have the receipts. And that is why I think you are seeing many, many more members, senators like Rob Portman, like Shelley Moore Capito, saying we are going to wait for this Mueller report to come out before putting ourselves on the record. And then, of course, the most important one showing a shift over the weekend was Senator Rubio, who essentially said no one is above the law, which sent a bit of a shudder, I think, through the White House. And you're probably going to see very few senators like him going on the record vehemently defending this president as more and more of these shoes drop.
Yeah. But wait, there's more. We'll talk to one of the Wall Street Journal reporters who broke the story that the president's inaugural committee is also being investigated by the feds.
And also on the other side of this, we're going to be talking to David Ignatius about a pretty stunning vote that happened yesterday in the United States Senate regarding Yemen and the United States' position towards Yemen and what it means not only for Donald Trump, but what it may mean to the people in that war-torn land who are just facing the most horrific of conditions and an ongoing battle.
You're watching Morning Joe. We'll be right back.
Thanks for checking out MSNBC on YouTube, and make sure you subscribe to stay up to date on the day's biggest stories. And you can click on any of the videos around us to watch more from Morning Joe and MSNBC. Thanks so much for watching.